how early humans honored the dead 3.7 million years ago, something happened that had never happened before. A mother stood over the body of her child and did not walk away. Every other creature on Earth, when death came to one of their own, moved on. The herd continued grazing. The pack kept hunting. The flock flew onward. Death was simply absence, a space where something used to be. But this mother, this early human ancestor, stood still. She touched the small body. She made sounds that were not words, but carried meaning. She stayed through the night, through the heat of the next day, through another night, and when she finally moved, she did not simply leave. She carried the body to a place she knew, a hollow beneath an acacia tree, and she covered it with branches, with leaves, with stones gathered one by one. She was not burying her child. Not exactly. She did not have words for what she was doing, did not have rituals or traditions to follow. She was inventing something that would define our species more than tools or fire or language. She was inventing grief. Tonight, as you settle into stillness, we travel back to the very beginning. Not the beginning of life, but the beginning of something that makes human life what it is. Beginning of honoring the dead. This is a story told slowly, meant to accompany your drift towards sleep. It is a story about loss. Yes, but also about love. About what it means to be the species that cannot simply walk away, that must mark the passing of those we cherish. Let it wash over you gently, like the rivers that would one day carry bodies to the sea, like the earth that would one day receive them, like the fire that would one day return them to ash and air. Here is something that should make you pause. We are the only species that buries its dead. Of all the millions of species that have ever lived on Earth, we alone dig graves. We alone build pyres. We alone create ceremonies to mark the transition from presence to absence. Other animals notice death. Elephants linger near fallen family members, touching them with their trunks. Chimpanzees have been observed sitting silently beside dead companions. Crows gather when one of their own dies, calling out in what some researchers believe is mourning. But none of them bury, none of them burn, none of them create rituals that say this death matters, this individual mattered, this loss will be remembered. Only us. What happened in our evolutionary history that made us the species of funerals? When did the first human ancestor look at death and decide that something must be done? These questions do not have simple answers. The evidence is scattered across millions of years, buried in caves and riverbeds, preserved in ways that are incomplete and often ambiguous. But tonight, we will trace what we know and imagine what we cannot know. We will travel back to the very first moments when death became more than biology, when loss became grief, when absence demanded ritual. The date in our title, Poe, 3.7 million years ago, marks something important. This is approximately when our ancestors began walking upright on two legs. The famous Lucy, discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, lived around this time. She was not human, not exactly. But she was walking the path that would lead to us. We do not know if Lucy's people honored their dead. The evidence does not survive. Bodies decay, bones scatter. The ceremonies of creatures who had not yet invented stone tools left no trace we can find. But we can wonder. Did Lucy mourn? Did her people linger near bodies the way elephants do? Did some spark of what would become human grief already flicker in their minds? Here is what we do know. By 100,000 years ago, our direct ancestors were definitely burying their dead. At a place called Kafse Cave in Israel, archaeologists discovered something remarkable. The skeleton of a young human, perhaps 9 years old, buried with deer antlers placed carefully in their hands. This was not accident. This was not the body simply falling into a hole and being covered by sediment over time. This was intention. Someone had placed those antlers there. Someone had arranged the body. Someone had cared. 100,000 years ago, in a cave overlooking what is now the Jezreel Valley, people who looked almost exactly like us stood over a dead child and decided that death required response. But the story goes back further. The Neanderthals, our close cousins who lived alongside our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years, they buried their dead too. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists found Neanderthal remains that changed how we think about these ancient people. One burial, dating to around 60,000 years ago, contained something unexpected. Pollen. Not just any pollen, but pollen from flowers. Many different kinds of flowers, clustered around the body in a way that suggested they had been placed there deliberately. Someone had gathered flowers for a funeral. 60,000 years ago, a species we once dismissed as brutish and primitive had invented the same gesture we still make today, laying flowers on graves, covering coffins with blooms. Perhaps you have brought flowers to a grave, stood in a cemetery holding roses or lilies or whatever blooms were available, feeling the strange inadequacy of the gesture and its necessity at the same time. If so, you were participating in something older than our species, something that connects you to Neanderthals in a cave in Iraq, to early humans in Israel, to ancestors so distant we do not even know their names. The flowers say what words cannot. This person mattered. This loss is real. Beauty should mark the place where life ended. But burial was not the only way. Fire came too. Eventually, fire that transformed bodies into smoke and ash, that released whatever animated them back into the sky, and water, rivers that carried the dead away. That washed them clean, that returned them to the flow from which all life emerged. Tonight we will explore all of these: the earth that received, the fire that transformed, the water that carried away. 3 elements, 3 ways of honoring, 3 responses to the same impossible fact that those we love will die, that we ourselves will die, that something must be done about this. Let the weight of your limbs settle into whatever holds you. We are going very far back, to times before history, before writing, before civilization, to times when the world was different, but grief was the same. The journey will be slow, the story will unfold gently. There is no rush. There is only this, the oldest human story, told one more time. To understand the first funerals, we must first understand what came before.
For most of life's history on Earth, death was simply an event.
Creature lived, then it did not. The body remained for a while, then it was gone. consumed by scavengers, broken down by bacteria, absorbed back into the soil. There was no pause, no recognition, no moment of this means something, even among our primate relatives. Death was processed differently than humans process it. A chimpanzee mother whose infant dies will sometimes carry the body for days, even weeks. She seems unable or unwilling to let go. But eventually, the body decays. She drops it. She moves on. There is no grave, no marker, no return to the place where the body fell. Something in the human mind changed this. Scientists call it death awareness. The recognition not just that others die, but that you yourself will die, that everyone you love will die, that death is not something that happens to other creatures, but something that is coming for you personally. This awareness is a burden no other animal carries. The deer does not know it will die. The lion does not contemplate mortality. They live in an eternal present, reacting to threats as they arise, but never haunted by the knowledge of their own ending. Bull. Humans alone carry this weight. We alone know from childhood onward that our time is limited. The people we love will leave us, that we ourselves will leave everyone we love. When did this awareness emerge? We cannot know exactly. Awareness leaves no fossils. We cannot dig up the moment when an early human first realized they would die. But we can trace the consequences of that awareness. And the clearest consequence is the funeral. When you bury a body, you are acknowledging that death has meaning. You are saying that this individual was not just a body, but a person, that their absence creates a hole that must be marked, that something must be done. The first burial, whenever and wherever it occurred, was the first clear sign that human consciousness had become different from all other consciousness on Earth. Let us imagine that first burial, not as scientists imagine it, with careful hedging and uncertainty, but as storytellers imagine it with detail and emotion and the recognition that real people did this, felt this, invented this. Psh, psh. She was old for her time, perhaps 40 winters, perhaps a few more. Her people had no name for her that we would recognize, but let us call her something. Let us call her First Mother, because she had borne many children, and her children had borne many more, and she was the center around which her small band revolved. She had survived things that killed most of her generation. The fever that swept through when she was young, the drought that drove away the animals they hunted, Bull, the attack by a rival band that left her with a scar across her shoulder. She had survived, and in surviving, she had accumulated something precious. Knowledge, where to find water in the dry season, which plants healed and which plants killed, how to read the sky for coming storms, how to track animals that had learned to hide. Her people depended on her, not for her strength, which had faded, but for her mind. For what she knew, for the wisdom that only long life can provide. And then, one morning, she did not wake. Her daughter found her, the daughter who had slept beside her for warmth, who had listened to her breathing through the night as she had listened since childhood. The breathing had stopped. The daughter made a sound that was not a word, because words had not yet been invented, but a sound that meant something had broken. Something was wrong. Something terrible had happened. Others came. They gathered around the body. They touched her, shook her, made sounds of their own, but she did not respond. She would never respond again. What happened next was the invention of the funeral. Not all at once, not as a complete ritual, but as a series of choices that had never been made before. The daughter did not want to leave. Bad, she sat beside the body. Through the day, touching the cooling skin, making sounds that might have been the ancestors of words for mother, for come back, for please. Others brought food, brought water, sat with her. Something was happening that required presence, required witness, required time. By the second day, the body was changing. The stiffness had come and gone. The smell was beginning. The eyes, which had been so alive, were clouding, sinking, becoming something else. The other animals would have left by now. The scavengers were circling, waiting. The natural order demanded that the body be consumed, returned to the cycle, made into food for others. But the daughter would not allow it. When the vultures came too close, she threw stones. When the jackals approached at night, she screamed and waved fire. She was fighting the natural order, refusing to let her mother become food, insisting that this body was still her mother somehow, still deserving of protection. Perhaps you have felt this. The impossible knowledge that someone you love is in that body, that the body must be protected, that letting scavengers take it would be a betrayal of everything the person meant. If so, you understand what the daughter felt. The first human to feel it, or among the first, inventing an emotion that would define our species forever. On the third day, a decision was made. The body could not stay where it was. The smell was attracting predators. The rest of the band was anxious, afraid. The natural order was pressing against this new thing they were doing. But the daughter could not simply leave the body behind. So she did something unprecedented. She began to dig, using her hands, using a stick, using a flat stone she found nearby. She dug into the earth. She dug until her fingers bled, until the hole was deep enough to hold what she needed to protect. And then, with help from others who had been watching, she placed her mother's body in the hole. They covered her with earth. Slowly, handful by handful, they buried her. And when the grave was complete, when the mound of fresh earth marked the place, the daughter did something else no one had done before. She gathered stones, large ones, heavy ones. She placed them on the grave, one by one, dual, until a cairn rose above the earth. The stones said, "This place is marked. This place is different. Something important lies here. Do not dig. Do not disturb. Remember?"
This was the first funeral.
Or something like it. We cannot know the details. Cannot know the names. Cannot know exactly when or where. But something like this happened. Somewhere, sometime. Some early human stood over a grave they had dug and felt something no creature had felt before. The weight of death. And the strange lightness of having done something about it. The invention spread. Not quickly, by our standards. But over thousands of generations, the practice of burial became part of what it meant to be human. Different groups developed different customs, different climates demanded different approaches, but the core remained the same. The dead deserve care. The dead deserve protection. The dead deserve to be placed somewhere with intention. At School Cave in Israel, archaeologists found some of the oldest deliberate burials of our species. The bodies dated to around 130,000 years ago. Some were positioned carefully, flexed into fetal positions as if returning to the womb. Bays of. Others were extended as if sleeping. One held the jawbone of a wild boar, clutched to the chest. A grave offering, something placed with the dead to accompany them wherever they were going. 130,000 years ago, humans were already imagining that death was a journey, that the dead might need provisions, that something continued beyond the stopping of the heart. Let that thought settle gently. The idea that something continues, that death is not an ending, but a transition. This idea is as old as burial itself. You cannot put offerings in a grave unless you believe someone will use them. You cannot position a body carefully unless you believe the position matters to someone. The first graves were the first theology, the first evidence that humans had begun to imagine what we still imagine today, that death is not the end of the story. The Neanderthals deserve their own chapter in this story. For a long time, scientists believed that only modern humans buried their dead. The Neanderthals were thought to be too primitive, too brutish, too different from us to have developed such sophisticated behavior. We were wrong. Shanidar Cave sits in the Zagros Mountains of Iraq, a vast cavern that opens onto a valley where humans and human relatives have lived for over 60,000 years. In the 1950s and 1960s, archaeologist Ralph Solecki excavated the cave. What he found changed everything we thought we knew about Neanderthals. He found their dead, buried deliberately, positioned with care, and in one case, surrounded by flowers. Let us call him Shanidar IV. That is the name scientists gave him. A Neanderthal man who died approximately 60,000 years ago. Boast. The soil around his remains contained something unexpected. Clusters of pollen, concentrated in ways that suggested flowers had been placed deliberately around the body, not scattered randomly, not blown in by wind, but clustered, as if someone had gathered handfuls of blooms and laid them beside the dead. Hollyhock, bachelor's button, yarrow, groundsel. These were the flowers identified in the pollen. Many of them had medicinal uses. Some were brightly colored. All of them would have required effort to gather. Imagine that funeral. A Neanderthal band gathered in a cave, the body of one of their own, laid out on the stone floor. Firelight flickering on the walls. Someone had gone out into the mountain meadows, picked flowers, brought them back, not because it was useful, not because it served any practical purpose, but because it was beautiful, because it was right, because the dead deserved more than simply being left. They placed the flowers around the body, colors against the gray stone, life beside death, beauty marking the end of a life. And then they buried him, covered him with earth, left him in the cave where his people had lived for generations. Some scientists dispute this interpretation. They suggest the pollen might have been brought in by burrowing rodents, by natural processes, by anything other than deliberate Neanderthal action. Perhaps they are right. We cannot know with certainty, but here is what we do know. Neanderthals buried their dead. Multiple sites across Europe and the Middle East confirm this. They dug graves. They positioned bodies. They sometimes placed objects with the deceased. Whether or not Shanidar IV was buried with flowers, he was buried with intention, and that alone tells us something profound about Neanderthal minds. Big difference. But the Neanderthals were not our ancestors. They were our cousins, a separate branch of the human family tree that evolved in Europe, while our ancestors evolved in Africa for tens of thousands of years. Both species practiced burial. Both species honored their dead. Both species had developed the awareness of death that makes funerals necessary. This suggests something important. Death awareness and funeral practices may not have been invented once and spread. They may have emerged independently in different human species at different times. Perhaps this is simply what happens when minds become complex enough. Perhaps death awareness is an inevitable consequence of consciousness. Perhaps any creature that becomes truly aware cannot help but notice its own mortality. If so, the first funeral was not a single event, but a threshold, a level of mental development that different human species crossed at different times, a moment that was bound to happen once brains became large enough and complex enough to truly think. Let us travel to another site, another burial, another glimpse into the minds of our ancestors. Kafsa Cave in Israel, 100,000 years ago, give or take 10,000. Here our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens just like us, buried their dead in ways that show sophisticated thinking about death. The burial of the child with deer antlers is the most famous. But there were others. An adult woman buried with a young child, positioned as if the child was cradled in her arms. Death had not separated them. The living had refused to let death separate them. They were buried together, mother and child, for eternity. Perhaps you have seen graves like this. In old cemeteries, you sometimes find them. A mother who died in childbirth, buried with the infant who died with her. A parent and child taken by the same illness, buried side by side. The impulse is ancient. The refusal to let death separate what love had joined. The insistence that those who belong together in life should remain together in death. 100,000 years ago, humans at Kafse felt this same impulse, made this same choice, refused this same separation. The graves at Kafse contained other things too. Red ochre, a pigment made from iron-rich earth, ground into powder and sprinkled over the dead. Why red ochre? We can only guess. Perhaps it represented blood, the life force leaving the body. Perhaps it was meant to restore color to skin going pale. Perhaps it had spiritual significance we cannot understand, but the presence of ochre tells us something certain. These burials were not simple disposals. They were ceremonies, rituals with symbolic elements, practices with meaning beyond the practical. The dead were painted red before being placed in the earth. Someone had to gather the ochre, grind it, apply it. These were not spontaneous acts, but planned ones, part of a tradition that was already established. How long does it take for a tradition to become established? If the burials at Kafse show a full tradition, with ochre and offerings and careful positioning, then simpler burials must have come before generations of burial, thousands of years of practice, building toward the complexity we see in the archaeological record. The first burial might have happened 200,000 years ago, 300,000, we simply do not know. The earliest evidence deteriorates, the oldest graves collapse, The first funerals left no trace we have yet discovered. But they happened somewhere in the vast stretch of time between our emergence as a species and the elaborate burials of Kafse. Humans invented the funeral, and once invented, it was never abandoned. Let your breath slow now, let your body sink deeper into rest. We have traveled far back, farther than history, farther than writing, to times when humans were few and the world was wild, and death was the great mystery it remains today. The people who invented burial were not different from us. Their brains were the same size. Their bodies were the same shape. Their hearts felt the same loves and griefs. They stood over graves they had dug and felt what you have felt, the weight of loss, the inadequacy of any gesture, the need to do something anyway. They are your ancestors. Their invention is your inheritance. Every funeral you have attended connects you to them across 100,000 years. Let us pause to consider what those early funerals were like. Not just the events, but the experience. What did they see? What did they hear? What did they feel? The sight of death was not hidden in those times. Today, we often do not see the dead. The body is prepared by professionals, embalmed, made to look peaceful, displayed briefly, and then closed away. In ancient times, death was witnessed fully, the last breath, the gradual change in the body, the stiffening and relaxing, the colors that came and went. People understood what death looked like, not from photographs or movies, but from direct experience. They had seen animals die, had seen humans die, knew the progression in their bones. This knowledge shaped their funerals. They understood the urgency, knew that bodies changed quickly, that burial or burning or release must happen before decay progressed too far. The sounds of ancient funerals filled the air, wailing, the raw sound of grief, uncontained. In many cultures, loud lamentation was expected, required. The louder the mourning, the greater the love. We have become quieter in our grief. Modern funerals are often hushed, restrained, tears falling silently. But in ancient times, grief was loud. It filled the landscape. It told everyone within earshot that death had come. Imagine hearing that sound across a prehistoric valley, the keening of mourners carrying on the wind, signaling to distant camps that someone had died, that a funeral was happening. That all were invited to witness. The sounds also included music. Even then, we do not know when music began, but by the time of the earliest confirmed burials, humans had been making music for tens of thousands of years. Bone flutes have been found dating back over 40,000 years. It is almost certain that music was part of funerals, songs for the dead, rhythms beaten on drums, melodies that carried grief into the air. The songs are lost, no recording preserves them, but they were sung around fires and beside graves. Bodies burned and rafts floated away. Music has always been part of how we honor our dead. Perhaps you have heard music at a funeral. Bull. A song that meant something, that captured what words could not. Felt music reach into your grief and give it shape. Above. If so, you experienced something as old as funerals themselves. The recognition that sound can carry what silence cannot, that melody speaks to parts of us that words do not reach. The smell of ancient funerals. This is something we rarely consider, but smell was a powerful part of the experience. The smell of fire, wood smoke rising from pyres, the smell of bodies burning. Not pleasant, but meaningful. The smell that said transformation is happening. The smell of earth. Fresh dug graves have a particular scent. The smell of soil that has not seen sun, that has been hidden below ground, that is now exposed to receive what must be buried. The smell of flowers, gathered and placed, their fragrance mixing with the other smells. Beauty against decay, life against death. The smell of bodies themselves in those times before refrigeration, before embalming. The dead began to change quickly. The smell was a reminder of urgency, of the need to complete what must be completed. The touch of the dead. In ancient funerals, people touched. They washed bodies, dressed them, carried them to graves or pyres or water. The dead were not kept at a distance. They were held one last time, felt going cold under loving hands, prepared by those who knew them best. This intimacy with death has largely disappeared from modern life. We hire others to do what families once did. We do not touch our dead the way our ancestors touched them. But something is lost in this, and something is gained. The protection from the rawness of death, the distance that makes grief bearable. But the ancient way had its own wisdom. The touching was part of the letting go. The physical preparation was part of the psychological release. The hands that washed the body were learning to accept what had happened. Let the sensory memories of those ancient funerals wash through you. The sights and sounds and smells and touches that have been part of human grief from the beginning. Even if you have never experienced a funeral in this ancient way, something in you recognizes it. Something in your body remembers, carried forward from ancestors who knew death as intimately as they knew life. But burial was not the only way. Somewhere, at some point in our long history, humans discovered another method of honoring the dead: fire. The use of fire for disposing of the dead is ancient, though not as ancient as burial. The earliest confirmed cremations date to around 20,000 years ago. The famous Lake Mungo remains in Australia show evidence of ritual burning. A woman's body was burned, her bones crushed, buried with ochre. But fire's use in death rituals almost certainly goes back further. Fire was controlled by human ancestors hundreds of thousands of years before these Australian cremations. It is hard to imagine that no one ever thought to use fire in connection with death. Let us imagine the first cremation, not the first accidental burning of a body. That would have happened many times. Forest fires, accidents with cooking fires, the unintended consequences of fire being everywhere in human camps. No, let us imagine the first deliberate cremation. The first time someone looked at a body and thought fire, thought release, thought transformation. Big hunter. Yeah. He was a hunter. Let us call him Flame Keeper, for he had been the one who tended the fire for his band. Who knew how to coax flame from ember? Who understood fire better than anyone? He had lived by fire, warmed himself by fire, cooked his food by fire, driven away predators with fire. Fire was his element, his mastery, his gift to his people. When he died, killed by a boar that turned on him during a hunt. His people brought his body back to camp. They prepared to bury him as they had buried others. But his daughter stopped them. She was young, perhaps 15 winters, but she had inherited her father's understanding of fire. She had watched him her whole life, learned from him, absorbed his knowledge, and she knew something the others did not. Her father did not belong in the ground. He belonged in the fire. They built a pyre, not knowing they were inventing something, not understanding that this would become one of humanity's great traditions. They simply gathered wood, lots of wood, more than they had ever gathered for any fire. They laid the wood in a pile larger than a person, higher than a child could reach. And on top of the wood, they placed Flamekeeper's body. The daughter lit the fire. She used the method her father had taught her. The friction of dry sticks, the careful nurturing of spark into flame. She lit the fire the way he had lit 1,000 fires before. And the fire caught. It spread through the dry wood, climbing, growing, reaching toward the body on top. The flames rose higher than any fire the band had built before. Orange and yellow and white at the center, hot enough to drive everyone back. They watched the fire consume what had been their hunter, their firekeeper, their father and friend. They watched the flesh disappear, the bones emerge, then crack, then crumble. They watched the smoke rise into the sky, and they felt something they had never felt at a burial. Burial hides the body, covers it, removes it from sight. The grief goes into the ground with the dead, hidden but not released. A cremation reveals the body's destruction, forces you to watch, but then transforms it into something else. The body becomes smoke, the smoke rises, the grief finds somewhere to go. The daughter watched the smoke climb toward the clouds, and she thought she understood something. Her father was not gone. He was going, rising, joining the sky he had always loved to watch. The fire was not destroying him. It was releasing him. Perhaps you have stood before a cremation fire.
In many cultures today, the family still watches that.
In Hindu tradition, in some Buddhist traditions, in traditions around the world, the watching is part of the ritual. You see what fire does. You witness the transformation. You understand in your body what your mind cannot accept. If you have done this, you know what the daughter knew. The strange peace that comes from watching, the feeling that something is being completed, that the fire is doing work that burial cannot do. When the fire died down, when the coals cooled enough to approach, the daughter gathered what remained. Not much. Some bone fragments, some ash, the residue of a man who had been everything to her. She placed the remains in a hollow stone, covered them, buried the stone beneath the hearth where her father had always tended the fire. He would remain where fire lived, near the flames he had loved, part of every fire that would be built in that place forever after. This is what cremation offered, a different kind of honoring, not the preservation of the body in the earth, but the transformation of the body into something else. Smoke and ash and memory, the elements separated and released, the matter that had been a person returned to the world in new form. The practice spread slowly, unevenly, Different cultures adopted cremation at different times. Some never adopted it at all, preferring burial or other methods. But where cremation took hold, it became deeply meaningful. The ancient Greeks burned their heroes on pyres. The Iliad describes the funeral of Patroclus in detail. The wood gathered, the body placed on top, the flames consuming what war had taken. Achilles watched his beloved friend become smoke and ash, and found in the burning some measure of release. The Vikings built ships of fire, placing their dead in boats that would carry them to the afterlife, lighting the vessel and pushing it onto the water. The flames against the dark sea, the smoke rising to where the gods waited. This was how a warrior should go, not into the passive earth, but into active transformation. The Hindus created ghats along the Ganges, places where the dead are burned and their ashes given to the river. For thousands of years, the fires have burned at Varanasi, consuming the dead by day and night, returning them to the sacred water that carries all life. Each culture found its own meaning in fire. Some saw purification, the flames burning away the impurities of earthly life, leaving only what was pure enough for whatever came next. Some saw release, the smoke carrying the spirit upward, freeing it from the body that had been its prison. Some saw transformation, the elements that made up a person returned to the cosmos, scattered back into the world from which they came. All of them understood something true. Fire changes things permanently, dramatically. There is no ambiguity about what fire does. No uncertainty about whether the dead are truly dead. But fire makes death real in ways that burial can obscure. But fire required something that burial did not. It required fuel, lots of it, bad G. A cremation pyre needs enormous amounts of wood. In places where wood was scarce, cremation was difficult or impossible. It required time and attention. You cannot dig a hole, place a body, and walk away. A cremation must be tended. Watched until it is complete. It required a different relationship with the body. You must watch it burn. Watch the transformation happen. Accept what you are seeing, better not bear. Not everyone was willing to do this. Not every culture found meaning in fire's destruction. Some preferred the gentler hiddenness of burial, the body intact beneath the earth, decaying slowly out of sight.
Let that preference rest without judgment. There is no right way to honor the dead.
There are only different ways, each with its own wisdom, each with its own comfort, each with its own understanding of what death means and what the living need. Being your ancestors chose what made sense to them, in their climate, with their beliefs, according to their understanding of the world. And their choices shape what feels right to you today, even if you do not know why. And then there was water, the third element, the flowing path, the carrier of bodies to places the living could not follow. Rivers have always held special meaning for humans. We settled beside them. Our civilizations grew along their banks. They provided water for drinking, for growing food, for washing, for everything that life requires. But rivers also go somewhere. They flow. They carry things away. They connect the place where you stand to places you have never seen. Big. It was inevitable that humans would give their dead to rivers. We do not know when the first river burial happened. Water does not preserve the way earth preserves. Bodies given to rivers are carried away, consumed by fish and current, scattered across miles of waterway. They leave no archaeological trace, but the practice is ancient. It appears in cultures around the world, in traditions that have no common origin, in places where rivers offered the most meaningful way to send the dead onward. Let us imagine a river funeral. The river was wide here, brown with silt, flowing steady toward the distant sea that only stories spoke of. The old man had been the band's storyteller.
It's a place on Earth where nightmares are real, buried, hunting in absolute darkness. It's a those that spoke around the fire about ancestors and spirits.
He had told them about the river, had spoken of where it went, to a great water so vast you could not see across it, where the sun sank each evening and was reborn each morning. He had always said the river knew things, that if you listened, you could hear it speaking, that it remembered everything it had touched on its long journey from the mountains. Now he was dead, and his people knew where he belonged. They built a raft, simple, just logs lashed together with vines. They placed his body on the raft, arranged him as if he were sleeping, his face toward the direction the river flowed, toward the great water he had always talked about but never seen. They placed things beside him, his speaking stone, the smooth rock he had always held when telling stories, some dried fish for the journey, gourd of water, which might have seemed strange, giving water to someone floating on water, but the ritual demanded provisions. At dawn, when the light first touched the river, they pushed the raft into the current. They did not light it on fire. Some river cultures did, but these people wanted the river to receive him whole, wanted the water to carry him the way it carried everything, gently, steadily, toward the end of all journeys. The raft caught the current, began to move. They watched it go. The old man grew smaller, became a shape on the water, became a dark spot against the brown current, became nothing at all. The river had taken him. The river would carry him to the great water. The river would tell him all its secrets along the way. Perhaps you have scattered ashes on water, stood at a river's edge or an ocean's shore, held an urn or a bag, released what remained of someone you loved into the moving water. If so, you know the feeling, the rightness of it, the sense that this is where they should go, that the water will take them somewhere you cannot follow, but somewhere meaningful nonetheless. Water funerals offered something that earth and fire did not. They offered journey. A buried body stays where you put it. A burned body becomes ash that can be scattered but does not go anywhere by itself. But a body given to water goes, it travels. It moves through the world after death in a way that feels like continuation. Like the dead are not simply stopped, but redirected, sent on a new path, rather than brought to an end. The Ganges River in India has received the dead for thousands of years. At Varanasi, the holiest city on the river, cremation fires burn constantly. The ashes are given to the water. The river carries them toward the sea. But not everyone is cremated. Some bodies are given to the Ganges whole. Holy men who have already been purified by their lives of devotion. Children who died before accumulating the impurities that cremation burns away. Pregnant women who carry another life within them. These bodies are wrapped in white cloth, weighted with stones, and lowered into the river from boats. The Ganges receives them, takes them down into her depths, carries them toward the ocean that Hindus call the final resting place of all rivers. The Vikings, too, used water stones, though differently. A great warrior might be placed in a ship, the finest ship available. His weapons would be placed beside him. His shield, his helm, everything he would need in the afterlife. Sometimes the ship was buried, pulled onto land and covered with earth to make a mound. But sometimes, for the greatest warriors, the ship was set aflame and pushed out onto the sea. Fire and water together, the ship burning as it drifted. The flames reflected on the dark water, the smoke rising to where the Valkyries waited to carry the warrior's soul to Valhalla. Let that image rest in your mind, a burning ship on dark water. The warriors on shore watching in silence. The fire consuming what they had loved. The water receiving what remained. Two elements working together, each one doing what it did best, the fire transforming, the water carrying away. Some island cultures used the ocean directly. Bodies were wrapped, weighted, taken by canoe to deep water, and lowered into the sea. The ocean received them. The currents carried them. The fish and the depths did what fire does on land, returning the body to the cycle, making it part of the great system of life and death that churns constantly beneath the waves. And some cultures combined water and sky. In parts of Tibet and Mongolia, where the ground was too frozen to dig and wood too scarce to burn, bodies were left on high places for the birds. Sky burial, it is called. The vultures come. The body is consumed. What remains is scattered by wind and water, carried across the mountains by forces no human controls. The dead become part of the birds that eat them, part of the wind that scatters them, part of the rain that washes their remnants into streams and rivers that flow toward seas that touch every shore on earth. Each method, each tradition, each way of honoring the dead expressed a different understanding of what death means. Burial said the body is sacred and must be protected, kept intact, returned to the earth from which it came. Body said the body is temporary and transformation is the path. That what matters is the spirit released, not the matter left behind. Water said death is a journey, that the dead go somewhere, that life flows onward even when individual lives have stopped. All of them were right, in their own ways, according to their own needs, and all of them were attempts to answer the same impossible question: what do we do with the dead? How do we honor those who are gone? How do we face the unbearable fact that those we love will stop being here? There is no single answer. There never has been. But the asking of the question, the attempt to answer it, this is what makes us human. No other creature asks. No other creature attempts. We alone bury and burn and give to water. We alone refuse to simply walk away. But why? Why could we not simply walk away the way other animals do? What happened in the human mind that made leaving impossible? Be the answer, or part of it. Be lies in how we bond. Humans form attachments that other animals cannot match. We do not simply live in groups, we love in groups. We create bonds so deep that they become part of our identity. We cannot tell where we end and our loved ones begin. When someone we love dies, they do not simply disappear from the world. They disappear from us, from our sense of who we are, from the future we had imagined, from the present we had taken for granted. The loss is not just external, it is internal. A piece of ourselves dies with them. Other animals bond, but differently. A wolf mourns a mate, but the mourning is brief. The pack moves on. Life continues. New bonds form. Elephants remember their dead for years, return to places where family members fell. But even elephants eventually continue. The herd must survive. The living must take precedence. Humans could not do this. We could not simply continue. The dead held us, anchored us, demanded something before we could move. The funeral was the something they demanded. Here is what a funeral does. It creates a moment, a defined time when grief is not just permitted but required, when the living gather and acknowledge together that something terrible has happened, that the world has changed, that nothing will be the same. Without this moment, grief has nowhere to go. It floats, attaches to everything, and makes ordinary life impossible. With this moment, grief has a container, a time and place where it belongs. After which, gradually, other moments become possible again. The funeral also creates witnesses. Grief shared is different from grief alone. When others see your loss, acknowledge it, stand beside you in it. The weight becomes bearable in ways it would not be otherwise. The early humans who gathered around that first grave were not just disposing of a body. They were creating community in the face of death. They were saying to the mourners, "You are not alone. We see your loss. We stand with you." This witnessing is still the heart of every funeral. The reason people travel long distances, take time from their lives, gather in rooms with the dead and the grieving. They come to witness, to make loss real by seeing it together, to carry part of the burden so no one has to carry it alone. Perhaps you have been such a witness. Perhaps you have stood at a funeral for someone you barely knew because someone you loved had lost them. Perhaps you came not for the dead, but for the living to be present, to show that their grief mattered. If so, you understand something ancient. The funeral is not just for the dead. It is for those who remain. It is how the living help each other survive losing. The funeral also creates ending, or the beginning of ending. The first step toward accepting what cannot be changed. Before the burial, before the burning, before the body is given to the water. The dead are still here in some sense. The body remains. The face can be seen. The hands can be touched. After the funeral, this is no longer true. The body is gone, hidden in earth, or transformed by fire, or carried away by current. What was here is no longer here. This is brutal. But it is necessary. Without this ending, the living would wait forever, would keep expecting the dead to return, would be unable to accept what has happened. The funeral forces acceptance. It says, this is real, this has happened, there is no going back. Early humans understood this, even without words to explain it. They knew that something had to be done with the body, that leaving it was impossible, but keeping it was also impossible, that some action was required to make the transition complete. The specific action mattered less than the action itself, burial or burning or water or sky. All of them served the same function. All of them created the ending that grief requires. Let your body continue to relax. We have been exploring difficult territory, the hardest things humans face, loss and grief, and the terrible necessity of continuing without those we love. But there is comfort here too, in knowing that you are not alone in this, that every human who has ever lived has faced what you have faced, that the pain you have felt has been felt by billions before you. The funeral connects you to all of them, to every mourner at every grave, to every watcher at every pyre. To every watcher at every pyre, to every watcher has stood at water's edge and let the current take what they loved away. You are part of a vast community of grief, and that community extends across not just space, but time, back to the very first funeral, back to the mother who would not walk away. The funeral also created memory. A grave is a place, a marked location, where the dead remain, where the living can return, where memory has an anchor in the physical world. Before funerals, the dead simply disappeared. But bodies decayed, bones scattered. Nothing remained to show where a life had ended. Memory had nowhere to go, no place to visit, no physical connection to what was lost. The grave changed this. Here is where your mother lies. Here is where your father rests. Here is the place you can return to when you need to remember, when you need to feel close to what you have lost. Perhaps you have visited a grave. Perhaps you have stood before a headstone or a marker, or simply a place you knew and felt something. Connection, presence, the strange sense that the dead are not entirely gone as long as someone remembers them. If so, you were experiencing something the first grave diggers felt. The discovery that death is not the end of relationship, that love can continue after life has stopped, that the dead live on in the memory of those who remember them. The grave creates a contract between the living and the dead. I will remember you. I will return to this place. I will speak your name. I will tell your stories. You will not be forgotten. This contract may be the most important thing funerals do. More important than disposing of the body. More important than creating an ending. More important than any practical function. The funeral says to the dead, you mattered. Your life had meaning. Someone will remember. And the funeral says to the living, you will matter too. When your time comes, someone will do for you what you are doing now. You too will be remembered. You too will not be forgotten. This promise of memory may be how humans first began to accept death. If death were truly the end, truly the absolute erasure of a person from existence, it might be unbearable. We might not be able to function knowing that we and everyone we love would simply cease. But if death is not the end of meaning, if the dead continue in memory, if their stories are still told and their names still spoken, then death becomes something other than annihilation. The funeral creates this other understanding. The funeral says meaning survives. The funeral says the dead are still with us in the only way they can be, in the hearts and minds of those who love them. The grave goods tell us about afterlife beliefs. When you place a tool in a grave, you believe the dead will use it. When you bury food, you believe they will eat. When you include weapons, you believe they will fight or hunt. These beliefs did not come first. The funerals came first. The impulse to place things with the dead, the feeling that they should not go empty-handed. Then the beliefs followed. Explanations for what the living were already doing. Stories about where the dead were going and what they would need. Different cultures imagined different destinations. Some imagined a realm beneath the earth, the dead descending into darkness, finding a world that mirrored this one but was somehow different. The underworld, Sheol, Hades, a place below where the dead continued in shadow. Some imagined a realm above, the dead rising to the sky, joining stars or ancestors or gods. Heaven Valhalla, a place of reward for lives well lived. Some imagined cycles, the dead returning, reborn in new forms, reincarnation, the wheel of existence that turns forever. Some imagined dissolution, the dead becoming part of everything, merging back into the universe, losing individual identity but gaining universal presence, returning to the source. Each belief shaped its funerals. If the dead were descending, graves were dug deep, giving them a head start on the journey down. If the dead were rising, cremation lifted them on smoke. Pyres sent them upward toward the sky. If the dead were returning, bodies might be preserved, kept ready for the soul that would eventually come back. If the dead were dissolving, water carried them to the sea, where they could merge with the vastness. Perhaps you have wondered where the dead go. Perhaps you have imagined someone you loved in some other place, some continued existence. Perhaps you have hoped that death was not the end. If so, you have joined the wondering that has occupied humans since the first funeral.
The question that has no certain answer, but will not stop being asked: where do they go?
What happens after? Is there anything at all beyond the last breath? The honest answer is that we do not know. No one has returned to tell us. Despite all the stories of near-death experiences and visions, the question remains unanswered, unanswerable.
But the funeral does not require an answer. The funeral is not about certainty.
It is about hope, about love, about the refusal to believe that those we loved have simply vanished. The grave goods say, we hope you are going somewhere. We hope you will need these things. We hope that death is not the end. This hope is ancient, and it is enough. It does not need to be proven. It only needs to be felt. The dead required things. This was a common belief. Across many cultures, the dead had needs, might suffer if those needs were not met, might return in anger if they were neglected. The Chinese burned paper money and paper houses, providing the dead with wealth and shelter in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians filled tombs with everything a person might need: furniture, food, servants represented in small statues. Why? The belief that the dead depend on the living, that our rituals matter not just to us but to them. This belief motivated elaborate funeral practices for millennia. Some would say these beliefs were primitive, superstitions that modern understanding has surpassed. We know now that the dead do not eat food or use tools or live in houses, but something true hides inside the belief: the dead do need us. Not for food or shelter, but for memory, for the speaking of their names, for the telling of their stories. The dead who are remembered continue in some real sense. The dead who are forgotten are truly gone. The funeral begins the process of remembering, ensures that the dead will be spoken of, honored, kept alive in the only way we can keep them. The relationship between living and dead continued. In many cultures, the funeral was not the end of obligation. It was the beginning of a new kind of relationship. The living visited graves, brought offerings, spoke to the dead, asked for guidance and protection. The dead became ancestors, powerful beings who could help or harm depending on how they were treated. This ongoing relationship gave comfort. The dead were not gone. They were changed. They were in a different place. But the connection continued. The love did not end. Modern cultures have largely lost this ongoing relationship. We bury or burn, and then we move on. We do not tend graves the way our ancestors did. We do not speak to the dead expecting them to hear. Some would say this is progress, freedom from superstition, acceptance of death's finality. Others would say something has been lost, the comfort of continuing connection, the sense that death is not a wall but a veil, the belief that love does not end with breathing. Both possibilities rest in you. The possibility that death is final, that the dead go nowhere, that what ends truly ends, and the possibility that something continues, that the dead are not gone but changed, that love reaches even beyond the grave. The funeral holds both possibilities, does not resolve them, does not need to. The funeral says whatever is true. This death matters. This loss is real. Something must be done. Graves of our ancestors tell stories, not in words. Words would come later, but in objects, in arrangements, in the choices of what to bury and how. Each grave is a message from the past. A small window into minds that could not write, but could still communicate across millennia today.
At Sumhir, in Russia, archaeologists found something extraordinary.
Graves dating to around 34,000 years ago. 3 individuals buried with more grave goods than almost any prehistoric burial ever discovered. The adult male was covered in nearly 3,000 mammoth ivory beads. 3,000. Each bead would have taken an hour to make. The beads alone represent 3,000 hours of work, more than a year of labor for one burial. 2 children were buried head to head, also covered in ivory beads, with mammoth ivory spears, with carved animal figures, with more evidence of care and effort than we can easily comprehend. Who were they? We do not know their names, we do not know their stories, but we know they mattered. No community would invest 3,000 hours in burial ornaments for someone who did not matter. The labor itself is evidence of importance. The effort is the message. These people were significant. Perhaps leaders, perhaps shamans, perhaps beloved members of a close-knit group. They were given gifts for the afterlife that must have taken the living months to prepare. Let us imagine the preparation. A man has died. Perhaps in a hunt, perhaps from illness. The cause is lost to time. His people decide that he will be buried with honor, with more honor than anyone has been buried before, with gifts that will show the spirits or the ancestors, or whatever powers they believed in. That this man was valued. The beadmakers begin their work day after day. They carve ivory into small shapes, drill holes with stone tools, polish until each bead is smooth and beautiful. Others prepare the grave, dig deep into the frozen earth, line the bottom with ochre, red ochre, that will color everything it touches. Still others gather the objects that will accompany him, his best spear, his favorite tools, the small carved figure he always carried. When everything is ready, they dress him in his beaded garments, thousands of beads sewn onto leather that has long since rotted away, leaving only the beads in the pattern of clothes he wore into death. They lower him into the grave. They speak whatever words they speak. They cover him with earth, and he waits. For 34,000 years, until someone finds him and wonders who he was. Perhaps you have chosen what to bury with someone you loved. Perhaps you have placed objects in a coffin, photographs or letters, or small meaningful things. Perhaps you have had to decide what should go with them and what should stay behind. If so, you understand the impulse behind those ivory beads, the need to send them with something, to not let them go empty-handed, to give them what they might need, or what they loved, or simply what you need them to have. The grave goods evolved over time. The earliest graves contained simple things: a stone tool, a piece of ochre, something small that the dead might need. Later graves become more elaborate: food for the journey, weapons for protection, jewelry and ornament to show status in whatever world they were entering. By the time of the Egyptian pharaohs, grave goods had become entire treasuries, rooms filled with furniture and food and servants, everything a king would need to live in style for eternity. The impulse was the same, the scale was different. The belief that the dead go somewhere, that they can take things with them, that what we send with them matters. But not all graves contained goods. Some were simple. Just the body and the earth, nothing more. These were not failures or signs of poverty necessarily. They were different beliefs. Some cultures believed the dead needed nothing, that they left the material world behind entirely, that sending goods was pointless or even harmful, keeping the dead attached to things they should release. Some believed the goods should go to the living, that the dead had no use for spears and beads, that the community should benefit from what the dead no longer needed. Different beliefs, different practices, but always the same fundamental act. The body placed in earth, the community gathered, the death acknowledged. The position of bodies tells stories too. Some were buried extended, flat on their backs, as if sleeping, waiting to wake. Some were buried, flexed, curled into fetal positions, knees drawn to chest, perhaps returning to the womb, perhaps being born into a new existence, perhaps simply the most natural position when space in the grave was limited. Some were buried sitting upright, facing east toward the rising sun, or facing particular directions that held meaning for their culture. Some were buried face down. In some cultures, this was for people who were feared, people who might try to return. The face-down position prevented them from finding their way back to the living. The fear of the dead returning is ancient, as old as the love that demanded funerals in the first place, perhaps older. The dead were loved, yes, but they were also something else now, something that did not belong in the world of the living. something that needed to go where it belonged and stay there. Some funerals included precautions. Heavy stones on graves to prevent the dead from rising, binding the body with rope or leather so it could not walk, breaking the legs symbolically so the dead could not return. These practices seem harsh to modern minds, but they came from the same place as the flowers and the beads, from the recognition that death changes everything, that the dead are not who they were, that something must be done to mark the boundary between their world and ours. Let that thought rest gently, the boundary between living and dead, the funeral as the marker of that boundary, the practices that keep the dead in their place and the living in theirs. This, too, is part of what funerals do. They do not just honor the dead, they protect the living. They create a separation that makes continuing possible. They say goodbye in ways that mean goodbye. The communal graves tell their own stories. At some sites, many individuals are buried together, generations placed in the same location. Family groups return to the same earth again and again. These were not mass graves in the modern sense, not the result of disaster or violence. They were family plots, ancestral burial grounds, places where a community placed its dead across centuries. The living would have known who lay there, would have visited, remembered, spoken the names of grandparents and great-grandparents and ancestors beyond memory. The place itself held the community together, anchored them to the land, connected them to all who would come before, all who would come after. Perhaps you have a family burial ground. Perhaps there is a place where your ancestors lie, generation after generation. Perhaps you have stood there and felt the weight of all those lives, all those stories, all that accumulated history in one small piece of earth. If so, you know what those prehistoric communities knew, that the dead create a place, that the graves of ancestors make land into home, that we belong where our people lie. Let us return to the flowers at Shanidar Cave, the pollen that suggested Neanderthals had gathered blooms for a burial 60,000 years ago. Whether or not that interpretation is correct, the image stays with us. Flowers for the dead, beauty for those who can no longer see beauty, color and fragrance for bodies going cold. Why flowers? They seem so fragile, so temporary, so inadequate against the permanence of death. A stone will last, metal will endure, but flowers wilt within days. Their petals fall, their colors fade, they become nothing. Perhaps that is why. Perhaps flowers are perfect for funerals because they do not last, because they mirror what has happened, because they say the fragility is the point. Life is temporary and beautiful and worth honoring precisely because it ends. Let us imagine another funeral, later than the first, but still impossibly ancient. Spring had come to the valley. The snow was melting. The flowers were blooming on the hillsides, yellow and purple and white against the brown earth still recovering from winter. The old woman had lived to see 70 springs, perhaps more. She had stopped counting long ago. Or perhaps she had never counted. Numbers might not have meant what they mean to us. But she knew she was old, the oldest in her band. The one who remembered things no one else remembered. The one who had buried everyone who had once been older than her. She had known she was dying for many days. had felt the life draining from her like water from a cracked gourd, had said whatever farewell she needed to say, and when the end came, it came gently in her sleep, without struggle or fear, just a breath that went out and did not come back in. Her daughter found her at dawn. The daughter who had cared for her these last difficult months, who had fed her and cleaned her and sat with her through the long nights. The daughter did not scream or wail. She had been expecting this, had prepared for this, had already begun grieving while her mother was still alive. She sat beside the body for a while, touching the cold hand, speaking quietly, saying the things that needed to be said before others arrived. Then she went to tell the others. They prepared the grave together, the whole band working, even the children carrying small stones. They chose a spot on the hillside where the morning sun would touch it first, where the view looked out over the valley her mother had loved, where wildflowers already bloomed. The digging was hard, the earth was still cold from winter. Not rushing, giving the work the time it deserved. While some dug, others prepared the body. They washed her gently with water warmed by the fire. They combed her white hair, what was left of it. They dressed her in her best clothes, the ones she had worn for ceremonies, the ones that still carried faint traces of the dyes she had made from plants. And then the daughter went to gather flowers. She climbed the hillside above the grave to where the blooms were thickest, where spring had painted the mountainside with color. She picked carefully, choosing the most beautiful, the ones that were fully open, the ones whose fragrance was strongest. She gathered them in her arms, more than she could easily carry.
More than seemed necessary?
But she kept gathering because her mother had loved flowers, because her mother had taught her the names of every bloom in this valley, because this was the last gift she could give when she returned. The grave was ready. They lowered her mother into the earth, gently as they could. And then the daughter stepped forward. She placed the flowers around the body, on the chest, beside the hands, framing the face that had been so familiar for so long, yellow flowers and purple flowers and white flowers, the colors of spring, the colors of life continuing, the colors that would fade but that were perfect right now in this moment. For this purpose, they covered the grave together, handful by handful, the earth falling on the flowers, burying them with the one they honored. And when the grave was filled, when the mound was shaped, planted more flowers on top, living flowers whose roots would grow down toward her mother, whose blooms would mark this place for years to come. Perhaps you have planted something at a grave. Perhaps you have knelt in cemetery dirt and placed a rose bush or a perennial, something that would return year after year, something living to mark a place of death. If so, you understand what the daughter understood. The need for life to continue there, the comfort of knowing something grows where someone you loved lies, the annual return of blooms as a kind of remembering. The flowers at funerals have never stopped, from Neanderthal caves to modern funeral homes, from prehistoric hillsides to contemporary cemeteries. We bring flowers We lay them on coffins and scatter them on graves and fill rooms with their fragrance. The gesture has survived every change in human culture, every shift in belief, every transformation in how we understand death.
And what comes after? Flowers remain adapted.
Simple, temporary, beautiful. Saying what words cannot say, honoring in the oldest way we know. The universality of grief is remarkable. Every culture that has ever existed has had funerals. Every human society has honored its dead in some way. There are no exceptions. The details differ wildly. What one culture finds respectful, another might find horrifying. What one tradition considers necessary, another might consider pointless. But the core remains the same. Something must be done. The dead cannot simply be left to bed. The living must gather and acknowledge and act. This universality tells us something about what it means to be human. It tells us that funerals are not inventions we could have done without. They are not cultural choices we might have made differently. They are responses to something fundamental in human consciousness, something that every human mind recognizes and cannot ignore. We are the creatures who bury, who burn, who give to water, who refuse to walk away. We are the creatures who bring flowers to graves, who speak to the dead, who remember names across generations. We are the creatures who know we will die, and who do something about that knowledge, who create rituals and practices and traditions that say death is not the end of meaning. This has always been who we are, from the very first funeral to this very night. The funeral created community. When someone died, people gathered from nearby and sometimes from far away. They came because they had to, because grief demanded witness, because the dead deserved presence. This gathering was not just for the dead, it was for the living. It reminded them that they were not alone. That loss was shared, that the weight of grief could be distributed across many shoulders. In prehistoric times, the funeral might have been one of the few occasions when scattered groups came together. Imagine bands that spent most of their time apart, following food sources, moving through territories that rarely overlapped, meeting only occasionally at seasonal gatherings. But when death came to one band, others might come. Word would spread somehow, signals or messengers, or the simple paths that connected communities. And they would gather to mourn together, to remind each other that they were part of something larger than their small bands, that connection extended beyond daily life. The funeral renewed bonds. People who had not seen each other in months or years stood together at graves. Relationships were remembered, alliances were renewed, the threads that connected communities were strengthened. The dead did this. Their dying brought the living together. Their funeral created space for reconnection. Their absence made presence more precious. Perhaps you have experienced this at a funeral. Perhaps you have seen relatives you had not seen in years, rekindled friendships that had faded, felt the web of connection that grief reveals. If so, you experienced something ancient, the social function of the funeral, the way death draws the living closer together. Funeral feasts were common. After the burial or the burning, people ate together, food was shared. Stories were told. The dead were honored through celebration as well as mourning. This might seem strange, eating and drinking while grief is fresh, but The feast served purposes that mourning alone could not. It brought energy to the depleted. Grief exhausts. The body needs food to sustain it through the work of loss. The funeral feast provided sustenance. It gathered memories. Over food and drink, people remembered. They told stories about the dead, shared moments that others had not known, built a collective picture of who had been lost. It affirmed life. Even in the presence of death, life continued. The eating and drinking said, "We are still here. We will go on. Life is stronger than death." The funeral feast continues today. In many forms, the reception after the service, the gathering at the family home, the wake with its food and stories and sometimes laughter. We eat in the presence of death. We drink. We tell stories. We do what humans have always done, turning mourning into community, turning loss into connection. The funeral also established status. How a person was buried said something about who they had been, the size of the grave, the quality of the offerings, the number of mourners gathered. In stratified societies, funerals could be displays of power. The pharaohs of Egypt built pyramids, monuments that announced their importance for millennia. The emperors of China were buried with armies of terracotta soldiers. Even in simpler societies, some funerals were more elaborate than others. A great hunter received more honor than a child who died young. A healer was buried with more care than a person of little consequence. This hierarchy of funerals might seem unfair, and in some ways it was. But it also reflected a truth that different lives have different impacts, that some losses are felt more widely than others. The funeral reinforced social order. Who stood where? Who spoke? Who led the rituals? These positions reflected and reinforced existing hierarchies. The chief or the priest or the eldest family member, they had roles to play, responsibilities that marked their status, positions that the funeral made visible. The funeral was not just about the dead. It was about the living and how they organized themselves. It was a public performance of social structure, a reminder of who held power and who did not. But the funeral also disrupted order. Death does not respect hierarchy. Kings die like peasants. The powerful become as helpless as anyone else. The funeral acknowledged this disruption. It created a space where normal rules might be suspended, where grief could overwhelm propriety, where the strict structures of daily life could relax. In some cultures, funerals were times of license. Normal prohibitions were lifted. Behaviors that would ordinarily be punished were allowed. The chaos of death found expression in the chaos of mourning. This tension between order and chaos is at the heart of the funeral. The funeral imposes structure on death, rituals that must be followed, sequences that must be observed, words that must be spoken, but death itself is chaotic, unpredictable, uncontrollable. The structure of the funeral is our attempt to impose order on what cannot be ordered. We contain death in ritual because we cannot contain it any other way. We create ceremonies because ceremonies give us something to do when nothing can be done. We follow traditions because following gives us a path. When grief makes the world pathless, let the community of the funeral hold you, all the gatherings across all the millennia, all the people who came together to mourn, all the meals shared in the shadow of death. You are part of this community, not just the community of your particular family or culture. but the community of all humans who have ever grieved, ever gathered, ever refused to let death be faced alone. Let us return to fire and explore it more deeply. Fire is different from earth or water. Fire does not preserve or transport. Fire destroys, transforms, changes matter from one thing into another. When you bury a body, it decays slowly over years, over decades. The process is hidden. You can imagine the dead as they were, sleeping in the earth. When you give a body to water, it is carried away. You can imagine it floating, traveling, floating, reaching distant shores. But when you burn a body, you watch it cease to be what it was. You see flesh become ash, bone become powder, the recognizable become unrecognizable. There is no pretending with fire, no imagining that nothing has changed. Fire forces you to witness destruction, and in that witnessing, to accept. The ancient cremations were different from modern ones. Today, cremation happens behind closed doors, in industrial furnaces, at temperatures designed to be efficient. The family does not watch. They receive ashes in an urn, sanitized and processed. In ancient times, and in many cultures still today, cremation was witnessed. The pyre was built in the open. The family stood close enough to feel the heat. The burning took hours, long enough to understand what fire does. Let us imagine a cremation in deep prehistory, before history, before writing, when fire was still relatively new to human hands. The hunter had been young, too young to die, but the great cat had been faster, stronger, more deadly than anyone expected. They found his body at the edge of the forest. What the cat had left of it, torn, broken, no longer fully human in appearance. His mother could not bury this, could not place this in the earth and remember it as her son. The damage was too great, body too changed. She decided on fire. They built the pyre away from the camp, where the smell would not reach the children, where the smoke would rise straight to the sky. They gathered wood for days, dry wood, seasoned wood, the driest they could find. Fire needs fuel, and this fire needed more fuel than they had ever gathered. The mother prepared the body herself, wrapped it in hides, tied it with sinew, made it into a shape that she could look at without seeing the wounds, made it into something she could release. At sunset, they carried the body to the pyre. The light was golden. The sky was clear. The band gathered in a circle, all of them, even the children who did not fully understand. The mother spoke. We do not know what she said. The words are lost across 20,000 years. But she spoke. Something that needed to be said. Something for her son. Something for herself. Something for everyone who had gathered. And then she lit the fire. The flames caught slowly at first, crackling through the dry wood, finding their strength, then faster, rising, climbing toward the wrapped body on top. The heat pushed everyone back. The light grew until it hurt to look directly at it. The flames reached the body and began their work. The mother watched. She did not look away. As terrible as it was, she watched every moment, bore witness to what fire did to what had been her child. The smoke rose, thick at first, dark with what was burning, then thinner, lighter, rising faster as the pyre burned hotter. The mother watched the smoke climb toward the stars, and she thought, or felt, or understood without thinking. That something was rising. Something was being released. Something that had been trapped was now free. The cat had broken her son's body. The fire was releasing what the body had held. The smoke was carrying it upward, toward the sky, toward wherever the dead go. Deathy, toward something beyond the reach of cats and wounds and death itself. They kept the fire burning through the night, fed it more wood when it faltered, watched the flames consume everything that would burn, waited for dawn and the cooling of coals. When morning came, what remained was ash and fragments, bone that had cracked in the heat, reduced to pieces no larger than pebbles. The mother gathered these remains, sifted through the ash with her bare hands, collected every fragment she could find. She placed them in a leather pouch, a small pouch, everything that was left of her son, fit in her two hands. She carried that pouch for the rest of her life, around her neck, against her heart. He was with her always, not buried in one place, not left behind when the band moved on, but traveling with her, remaining close. When she died many years later, the pouch was buried with her, mother and son together in the earth at last, united after years of separation. Perhaps you know someone who carries ashes. Perhaps you have met someone with a small portion of cremated remains in a locket, or a ring, or a container they keep close. If so, you have met someone continuing an ancient tradition, keeping the dead near, refusing complete separation, holding what remains of what was loved. Cremation solved problems. When the band was nomadic, moving constantly in search of food, burial meant leaving the dead behind. The grave would be there, but the living would be elsewhere, perhaps never to return. Cremation allowed the dead to travel. The ashes were portable, could be carried, could be scattered in a meaningful place, or kept forever. When bodies were damaged by violence or accident or predators, cremation transformed what was unbearable to see into something neutral. Ashes looked the same regardless of how the person died. The fire erased the manner of death, leaving only the fact of it. When disease had killed, cremation destroyed what might spread sickness. The flames purified, made safe what might have been dangerous, protected the living from the dead. These practical advantages were real, but they do not explain why cremation became sacred. Many cultures developed elaborate beliefs about fire and the dead, not just that cremation was useful, but that it was necessary, that the fire did something spiritual, something essential, something that could not be accomplished any other way. The Hindu tradition teaches that fire releases the soul from the body, that without cremation, the soul remains trapped, unable to move onto its next existence. The fire is not destruction, but liberation. Not ending, but transformation. The ancient Greeks believed fire purified, that the flames burned away mortality itself, leaving only what was immortal, The smoke carried the essence of the person to the realm of the gods, where those deserving would find their eternal rest. Different beliefs, similar intuitions. Fire does something. Fire changes things. Fire is not passive, like earth, or constant like water. Fire is active, transformative, alive, in some sense, that other elements are not. To give a body to fire is to participate in that activity, to join in the transformation, to witness and assist and be changed yourself. Let that thought settle. Fire transforms, not just the dead, but the living who watch. The mourners who stand before the pyre are not the same after as they were before. Something in them changes too. The funeral transforms everyone it touches, the dead into ash or earth or water, the living into people who have faced death and survived it, the community into a group that has grieved together and will carry that grief forward together. Transformation is the heart of it. Nothing stays the same. That is what death teaches. That is what the funeral acknowledges. That is what every burning pyre proclaims against the darkness. The children watched everything. At those first funerals, and at every funeral since, children were present. They did not understand what death meant. Not fully, but they watched, they absorbed, they learned. Wild gold. How do you explain death to a child? The question is as old as humanity itself. Every parent, every grandparent, every adult who has loved a child has faced this question. The answer, across cultures and centuries, has usually been the funeral itself. You do not explain death in words alone. Words are not enough. You show death. You let children see the body, participate in the ritual, witness what the community does when someone dies. Let us imagine a child at one of those early funerals. She was perhaps 5 winters old, bold enough to understand that something important was happening, young enough that the importance was still mysterious. Her grandfather had died. The man who had held her since she was born, who had sung to her, who had carried her on his shoulders through the tall grass. She did not understand that he was never coming back. The concept was too large, too strange. Her mind could not hold it. But she understood that everyone was sad, that her mother was crying, that the other adults were speaking in quiet voices, that something had changed. They let her see the body, laid out near the fire, looking like he was sleeping, except that his chest did not rise and fall, except that his eyes did not open when she spoke his name. She touched his hand. It was cold. Not the cold of coming in from outside, a different cold. A cold that seemed wrong, that seemed like it should not be. She pulled her hand back, looked at her mother, waited for someone to explain. Mother. Her mother picked her up, held her close, spoke softly in her ear. Grandfather has gone to sleep. A different kind of sleep. He will not wake up, but he is not in pain. He is not cold anymore. He has gone somewhere we cannot follow. The child did not understand, but she felt her mother's arms around her, felt the safety of being held, knew that even though something terrible had happened, she was not alone. They took her to the burial. She watched them lower the body into the ground, watched them cover it with earth, watched the mound rise where her grandfather now lay. She did not cry. She was too young to cry for death. The sadness would come later. In waves, over years, as she understood more and more what had been lost. But she learned something that day, something that would stay with her forever. This is what we do when someone dies. This is what we do. We gather, we bury, we remember. The transmission of funeral practices happened through these moments. Children learned by watching, by participating, by doing what they saw others do. The traditions passed from generation to generation, not through instruction but through experience. By the time a child was grown, they had attended many funerals. They knew what to do. They knew the songs, the words, the gestures. They knew how to grieve, because they had watched others grieve, had been held while they grieved, had learned that grief was something you survived. Perhaps you remember your first funeral. Perhaps you remember standing beside a grave as a child, confused but present, learning something you could not have learned any other way. If so, you received what every generation receives: the knowledge of how to face death, passed down through practice, taught by witnessing, absorbed through being there. Children's deaths were the hardest. This was true in prehistory. It is true today. When a child dies, the grief is different, sharper, more incomprehensible. Children are supposed to outlive their parents. This is the order of things. When that order is reversed, something breaks that is difficult to repair. The archaeological record shows that children's burials were often especially elaborate. More care, more offerings, more effort, as if the extra attention could somehow compensate for what had been lost. At Kafse Cave, that child with the deer antlers, someone had placed those antlers with care, had chosen them for meaning we can only guess at, had tried to give this young person something to carry into whatever came next. Let us imagine a child's funeral in those ancient times. The baby had lived only 3 months, long enough to be named, long enough to be loved, long enough for her absence to tear a hole in her parents' hearts. She had died in the night. They did not know why. Perhaps illness, perhaps something wrong inside her that they could not see. The cause was lost to time, only the fact remained. The father dug the grave himself, would not let anyone help dug until his hands bled, until the hole was deep enough to protect what he needed to protect. The mother prepared the body, washed it, wrapped it in the softest fur she had, held it against her chest one more time before letting go. They buried her with everything small and precious they had. A tiny shell necklace, a carved bone figure no bigger than a thumb, a smooth stone that her mother had carried since childhood. They buried her facing east, toward the rising sun, toward whatever morning was coming that she would never see. Place on earth. The other children watched, not understanding, not fully, but learning. Learning that life was fragile, that death came even for the very young, that some losses were so terrible that even grown-ups could not stop crying. World. Learning that even so, even when the loss was unbearable, there were things you did, rituals that had to be performed, ways of honoring that had to be followed. The funeral held them together. The ceremony gave them something to do with their grief. The burial gave them a place to return to. When the baby felt too far away, perhaps you have lost a child. Perhaps you have experienced that particular grief, the grief that feels like it should not be survivable. If so, know that you are not alone. That parents have lost children since the beginning of humanity. That the first funeral might well have been for a child. The grief does not diminish across millennia, but neither does the capacity to survive it, to continue, to honor what was lost and still find ways to live. The children who watched funerals grew up and buried their own dead. The cycle continued, continues still, will continue. As long as humans exist, we learn death young, we face it throughout our lives. We pass what we know to those who come after. The funeral is our teacher, our ritual of education, the way we transmit the hardest knowledge across generations. Why does death need ritual? Why cannot we simply dispose of bodies and continue? Other animals do this. The herd moves on. The pack keeps hunting. Why could humans not do the same? The answer lies in meaning. Humans are the species that creates meaning. We do not simply exist. We interpret our existence. We ask why things happen, what they signify, how they connect to larger patterns. Death without ritual is death without meaning. Just biology, just the ending of one organism among billions, just matter returning to matter. But death with ritual becomes something else. It becomes a statement about what the dead person meant, about what life itself means, about what we believe continues after the body stops. The funeral creates meaning. It says, this life mattered, this death matters. Something survives even when the body does not. The meaning varies across cultures. Some funerals emphasize the journey. The dead are going somewhere. They need provisions, guides, protection for the path. Some funerals emphasize transformation. The dead are becoming something else. They are shedding mortal form, moving to a different kind of existence. Some funerals emphasize memory. The dead will live on in those who remember them. The stories will be told, the names will be spoken. As long as memory persists, the dead are not entirely gone. Some funerals emphasize return. The dead are going back to where they came from, earth to earth, dust to dust. Body returns to the cycle from which it emerged. All of these meanings are true in their own ways. The dead do go somewhere, even if that somewhere is simply the earth beneath our feet. The dead are transformed. Their matter becomes other matter. Their energy disperses into the world. The dead do live in memory as long as someone remembers. Something of them persists. The dead do return to the elements, to the cycle, to the great flow of matter and energy that makes up the universe. The funeral gives us a way to hold these truths, to make them real, to feel them in our bodies as well as understand them in our minds. Perhaps you have felt meaning at a funeral. Perhaps you have stood beside a grave or watched a pyre burn and felt something larger than grief, something like understanding, like acceptance, like recognition of where you yourself fit in the great pattern. If so, you have experienced what funerals are for: the creation of meaning from meaninglessness, the transformation of biological fact into human truth. The oldest question is the question of death. Every philosophy, Every religion, every system of meaning that humans have created addresses death, tries to explain it, tries to accept it, tries to find a way to live with the knowledge that life ends. The funeral came before the philosophy. The ritual came before the explanation, burying their dead long before they had words to explain why, long before they had developed the elaborate belief systems that would give death meaning. They'd buried because they felt they must, because walking away was impossible, because something in the human heart demanded action in the face of loss. The explanations came later. The meanings were constructed over time, but the impulse was there from the beginning. The impulse to do something, to mark the passing, to refuse to let death be nothing. This is perhaps the most human thing about us. Not our tools. Other animals use tools. Not our language. Other animals communicate. Not even our consciousness. We cannot be certain what other animals experience. But our funerals, our need to honor the dead, our refusal to simply walk away, this is uniquely ours. This defines us. This makes us who we are. Let your breath deepen now. Bless. Let your thoughts slow wheel. We have been exploring the deepest territory, the meaning of death, the purpose of ritual, the questions that have no final answers but demand to be asked. You do not need to resolve these questions tonight. No one ever resolves them. They are not problems to be solved, but mysteries to be lived. The funeral is how we live them, how we face what cannot be faced, how we accept what cannot be accepted, how we continue when continuation seems impossible. The great equalizer. Death comes to everyone. This is what the funeral acknowledges. No matter how powerful, how wealthy, how loved or hated or forgotten, the end is the same. The pharaohs built pyramids, great tombs filled with treasures, monuments that proclaimed their eternal importance. But they died like everyone else. Their bodies decayed. Their treasures were looted or locked behind glass in museums. Their names survive only because they were carved in stone. Most people who ever lived are forgotten completely. The funeral acknowledges this equality in death. The king and the peasant are the same. The mighty and the humble both become earth or ash or water. Some find this comforting. The great democracy of death, the knowledge that your ending is the same as every ending that has ever been. Some find it terrifying. The erasure of everything that made you distinct, the reduction of a unique life to generic death. Both responses are human. Both are part of what funerals help us feel and process, and eventually accept. The funeral also acknowledges the particular, even as it recognizes the universality of death. The funeral insists on the particularity of this death, this person, this life, this loss. The funeral says death is universal, but your mother's death is not universal. It is particular, unique, the death of the one person who was your mother and no one else's. This tension between universal and particular is at the heart of every funeral. We know that everyone dies, but this death feels different. This death is ours. This death matters in ways that other deaths do not. The funeral holds both truths at once. Everyone dies, and this death is unbearable. Both are true. Both must be acknowledged. Both are part of what it means to grieve. Let us return to the water one more time. Let us imagine a funeral at a river. In those ancient times when rivers were highways and boundaries and sources of life, the river had no name, or rather, its name has been lost across the thousands of years since this funeral took place. But it was wide, brown with silt, flowing steadily toward the sea that lay beyond the horizon. The people who lived along its banks had given their dead to it for generations. The woman who had died was a healer. She knew which plants eased pain, which plants stopped bleeding, which plants brought fevers down. She had spent her life learning these things and teaching them to anyone who would learn. Many people owed her their lives. She had pulled them back from the edge of death, had sat with them through long nights of illness, had done what could be done when nothing could be done. Now she was dead, and her people gathered at the river to send her on her final journey. They built a raft, larger than the rafts they usually built for funerals, because she had been important, because she deserved more. They covered the raft with flowers and herbs, the same plants she had used for healing, laid out in patterns that meant something, that honored what she had known. They dressed her in white, white for purity, white for the foam on the river's surface, white for the clouds that gathered over the water. At sunset, they carried her to the river's edge. The whole community was there. Everyone she had ever healed, everyone whose child she had saved, everyone who had learned from her, everyone who would miss her. They placed her on the raft, arranged her hands across her chest, tucked final offerings beside her, a small pot of healing salve, a bundle of dried herbs, a stone from the place where she had been born. Her eldest daughter spoke. We do not know the words. They were spoken into air and carried away by wind. But we can imagine words of thanks for a life well lived, for knowledge freely shared, for healing given without asking for return. Words of grief for the loss that was tearing them apart, for the future that would not have her in it, for the questions they would have and she would not be there to answer. Words of hope, that wherever the river carried her, she would find peace, that whatever waited beyond the horizon, it would welcome her, that death was not the end, but a change in the current. They pushed the raft into the water, slowly at first. The edge of the river was shallow. They waded in, up to their knees, pushing the raft until it caught the current. And then the river took her, craned, grabbed the raft, pulled it toward the center, began to carry it downstream. The people on the shore watched, silent now, as the healer who had saved so many floated away from them. She grew smaller. The raft became a dark shape against the brown water. The sunset painted the river gold and orange and red. The raft floated through the colors, through the fading light, toward the darkness gathering in the east. They stayed until they could not see her anymore. Some stayed longer, watching the empty river, imagining the journey she was taking, the places the current would carry her. Her daughter stayed longest of all, standing in the shallows as the stars came out, as the night sounds began, as the river kept flowing, indifferent to loss, carrying everything toward the sea. Perhaps you have released something to water. Perhaps you have stood at a shore and let ashes fall from your hands, watch them spread across the surface, sink, disappear. If so, you know what the daughter knew, the strange peace of releasing, the comfort of knowing the water will carry what you cannot carry, the trust that the river knows where to go. Water funerals continue today. In India, the Ganges receives the ashes of millions. The holiest river, the Mother River, takes the dead into herself and carries them to the ocean. Bali. Cremated remains are released to the sea. The water that surrounds the island, that has always been part of life, receives the dead and holds them in its vastness. In many cultures, scattering ashes on water is the preferred way. The ocean or the lake or the river that the dead person loved, receiving what remains, keeping it forever. Water connects. Every river flows to the sea. Every sea connects to every other sea. The water that received the healer on that nameless river is the same water that touches every shore on earth. When you give a body to water, you give it to the whole world. You release it into a system that has no boundaries, that reaches everywhere, that will carry your loved one to places you cannot imagine. This is part of water's meaning in funeral rites, the dissolution of boundaries, the release from the particular into the universal, the return of the drop to the ocean. But water also takes. The river does not ask permission, but water is not asked permission. The current does not pause. Once you release to the water, what you release is gone, carried away by forces you cannot control. This is the terror of water funerals, as well as their comfort. You must let go. You must trust the current. You must accept that you cannot follow where the water goes. This letting go is perhaps the hardest part of grief. The recognition that you cannot hold on. That the dead are going where you cannot go. That some separations are absolute. The water funeral forces this recognition. You watch the raft float away. Watch it grow smaller. Watch it disappear. And you know, in your body, what your mind does not want to accept. They are gone. They are going where you cannot follow. What the first funerals taught us about life. It may seem strange that rituals for the dead would teach us about living. But this is exactly what funerals do and have always done. The funeral teaches us that life is precious. When you stand over a grave, when you watch a pyre burn, when you release ashes to the water, you are reminded of what has ended. And in that reminder, you recognize what you still have. The dead cannot see the sunrise, cannot taste food, cannot hold the people they love. But you can. You are still here, still capable of all the ordinary miracles that life contains. The funeral makes life vivid, sharpens the edges of experience, reminds you that your time is limited and therefore precious. Perhaps you have felt this after a funeral. Perhaps you have come home from a burial and held someone a little tighter, noticed the sunlight a little more, appreciated what you had been taking for granted. If so, you experienced what funerals have always provided, the gift of awareness, the reminder to live while you can. The funeral teaches us that we are connected. No one dies alone, even those who die in solitude. Their death ripples outward, touches everyone who knew them, changes the shape of every community they belong to. The funeral makes this connection visible. People gather from distant places. Faces you have not seen in years appear at the graveside. The dead draw the living together in ways they could not when they were alive. This gathering is itself a lesson. We are woven into each other, more tightly than we usually notice. The threads that connect us become visible only when one is pulled from the fabric. The funeral teaches us that meaning matters. The dead do not need our rituals. They are beyond need. Breathe. The flowers and the words and the careful arrangements, these are for the living, but we need them desperately. We cannot simply dispose of our dead and continue. We must create meaning, must tell ourselves stories about what death is and why it happens and what comes after. This need for meaning is fundamental to human nature. We are the species that asks why, that cannot accept that things simply are, that must find or create significance in everything we experience. The funeral is where we do this work for death, where we take the brute fact of ending and wrap it in meaning, where we transform biology into story, matter into memory, the connection across millennia. Tonight, as you listen to this story, you are connected to every human who has ever grieved. The mother who invented the first burial, the Neanderthal who laid flowers beside the dead, the prehistoric community that gathered on a hillside at sunset, the daughter who watched a raft disappear downstream. They are your ancestors, not just in the biological sense, but in the sense that matters more. They invented what you have inherited. They created the practices that still shape how you face death when you attend a funeral. You are participating in something they began. When you stand beside a grave, you stand where they stood. When you grieve as they grieved. The funeral connects you to them across thousands of generations, across the vast stretches of time that separate prehistory from today. Blank. Let that connection hold you. You are not alone in your grief. You have never been alone. Every human who has ever lived has felt what you feel, has faced what you face, has found ways to continue that you too can find. The funeral is their gift to you, the accumulated wisdom of millennia condensed into ritual, passed down through generation after generation, waiting for when you need it. The future of funerals. What will funerals look like in 1,000 years? 10,000? 100,000? We cannot know. The future is as hidden from us as the past would have been from those who dug the first graves. But we can be certain of one thing. There will be funerals as long as humans exist, as long as we form attachments and feel loss, as long as we are the species that cannot walk away. There will be funerals, the forms will change, the beliefs that give them meaning will evolve. Technology may alter how we dispose of bodies in ways we cannot yet imagine, but the core will remain. The gathering, the honoring, the acknowledgement that someone has died and their death matters. This will persist because it must, because we are incapable of abandoning it. Perhaps our descendants will look back at our funerals the way we look back at the first burials, with wonder that we did things so differently. With recognition that we were doing the same thing they do. With gratitude that we continued the tradition they inherit. We are links in a chain, connecting the past to the future, carrying forward what we received, adding what we add, passing on what must be passed on. The funeral is the chain itself, the unbroken thread that connects the first human to grieve to the last human who ever will.
Let your body settle deeper now. We are approaching the end of this journey, the long exploration of how humans learn to honor their dead. But before we rest, one more thought.
You will be mourned someday, whether near or far. Your time will end, and when it does, people will gather. They will bury or burn or release to water. They will speak words about who you were. They will feel the weight of your absence. This is not a sad thought. It is a promise. You matter. Your life matters. Your death will matter. Someone will grieve you. Someone will refuse to walk away. This is what it means to be human, to be part of the community of grief that spans all of history, to be loved enough that your ending will be marked. The first funeral was a promise made to all who would come after. You will not be forgotten. You will not be abandoned. When your time comes, we will do for you what we do for all our dead. That promise has been kept for over 100,000 years. It will be kept for you. It will be kept for everyone you love. This is the comfort the funeral offers. Not that death is not real, not that loss does not hurt, but that you are not alone, that you are part of something larger, that the rituals that have held humans together since the beginning will hold you too. Sleep now as humans have slept after funerals for 100,000 years. The grief carried, the rituals performed, the dead honored. And then rest. Let the images from tonight settle gently. The mother who would not walk away. The flowers laid beside Neanderthal dead. The pyres burning against the night sky. The rafts floating downstream toward the sea. Let them become part of your dreams. Not something you need to remember, but something that is simply part of you now. You have traveled far tonight, back to the very beginning of human grief, back to when we first learned that death required response, back to the invention that would define our species forever. The dead are resting now. The ancient ones we imagined tonight. The ones who invented burial and burning and water release, they are long gone. Return to earth or ash or sea, part of the great cycle that takes everything, eventually, but something of them remains. In the rituals we still perform, in the impulse to honor that we still feel, in the refusal to walk away that still defines us. They live in every funeral you have ever attended, in every grave you have ever visited, in every moment of grief you have ever felt. They are your ancestors in the deepest sense. Bad place, and tonight you have remembered them. Let that remembering fade now into sleep. Let your breath slow. Let your body soften. Let the weight of the day release. You are held by whatever supports your body, by the warmth that surrounds you, by the darkness that asks nothing of you, and by the great chain of humanity that stretches back to the first funeral and forward to the last. You are part of that chain. You belong to that community. You are never alone. Sleep, sleep as the first humans slept after the first burial, exhausted by grief, comforted by ritual. Ready for morning to come. Sleep. And let the dead keep their own rest, you have honored them tonight by remembering, by imagining, by feeling what they felt. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. But before you drift away completely,
One final thought.
if you found yourself moved by human endurance, by the way our ancestors faced death and found ways to continue, by the strength that ordinary people carry within them, there is another journey waiting. She shouldn't have survived. How an elderly woman endured Yakutia's minus 71-degree winters. In the coldest inhabited place on Earth, an elderly woman lived a full life, 73 years, in temperatures that should have made survival impossible. She survived because she inherited knowledge, thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about how to live in partnership with the cold, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, just as funeral traditions were passed down. That story connects to this one in ways you might feel more than understand. Both are about what humans can endure. Both are about knowledge that spans generations. Both are about the extraordinary resilience of ordinary people. But that is for another night, when you are ready. When the cold calls you to listen. For now, let sleep take you. You are warm. You are safe. You are home. The dead rest. The living rest. Everything rests eventually. Tonight, you have honored the first humans who honored their dead. You have remembered those who learned to remember. Now, rest. Let go of everything, the stories, the images, the questions without answers. Let it all settle beneath the surface. Like bodies settling into earth, like ashes settling into water, like everything returning to where it belongs. Good night.